So in this video, what we're going to talk about is creating a client for our person's RESTful service that we created an assignment for. We will develop functionality that will allow users to get a current list of persons, add a person to the list, modify a person in the list, delete a person from the list, and get a list of persons by last name. So basically, this is the list of the endpoints that we have available to us in our RESTful service. So to begin with, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project, and this is going to be a Maven project. It's going to be a web application. We'll call this project our person client. We'll use org.usd.csci.persons as our package. So we want to make sure that we have our prime faces, Java server faces, prime faces framework. So we'll click on properties, framework, add Java server faces, and then in components, select prime faces. One of the first things that we need when we start working on our client is, remember, we have a model view controller architecture. So the model is our data, and our data that we're going to be working with is persons. So we need a class representing a person in our client code. So I'm going to create a new Java package. It's going to be org.usd.csci.person.data. And this is where I'm going to store my data class. The easiest thing to do for my persons class would be go to my service, and we have a person class there, and I can copy it and paste it into this package. You can notice that we have some error messages because it's missing the library that's necessary for our JSON functionality. Again, the easiest thing to do would be go to the POM XML file in our service. We know that we worked with JSON in that, so we're going to copy that dependency and put it in the POM for my client, and I should be able to do a successful clean build. Now recall in our person class that, let's do that again, make sure that it did a clean and build. I didn't paste the dependency correctly. There we go. I now recall in our person class that we defined some constants for making sure that our key names in our JSON for our client are the same key values as the JSON in the server. So remember, JSON objects are represented by key value pairs, and so we need to make sure that our keys are always consistent. So that's why we declared some constants. Also recall that we have two methods. We have a method toJSON that will take this person and return it as a string representing an object in JSON format. And we have JSON. We can also return it as a JSON object. But basically, it's just taking this object, this person, and creating a JSON string from its attributes. Okay, so then the next thing we need is we need code that will allow us to access our RESTful service. So I'm going to right click on my project, put new, other, and what I want to do is create, I'm selecting other, and I want to create a web service, and this is going to be a RESTful Java client. And we'll call it person client. And we'll put it in our data package. And we want to create this from an existing project. So we're going to browse, and we're going to find our RESTful service. We're creating a client that is going to access this service. And what NetBeans did was created a class for us that we can use to access the service. So it'll create requests to that service. So it's going to allow us to delete a person, create a person, get a person by ID, and update a person. The one method we have missing is that we need to be able to get a list of all persons. So this method, persons, asks you to send in an ID, and it sets this. So it basically will put the ID at the end of the request and allow you to get a person by ID. But if we want to get all persons, then we don't want the ID on the end of it. So the easiest thing to do would be to copy this method and get rid of the parameter and get rid of this. This statement sets the parameter in the URI. And because we don't need that anymore, we can do a get without an ID, and it'll return all of the persons. So this person's class creates a web target, and it creates a JavaX client, and we have the base URI. And we can test this. We can go to our browser, and test it, and see that when we call persons, this this is what's going to be returned to us. So that's what we get. We get an array of persons called persons. And it's got the ID, the last name, the birth date, the first name of each person in the list. So we have our person class, we have our person client that speaks directly to our RESTful service. Now we need to create a controller. So we're going to create a managed bean that's going to be the controller between the user interface and this client. So again, we're going to do new, other, we're going to specify Java server faces, and we want a JSF managed bean. And we're going to call this person controller. We're going to put it in the person JSF package. It's going to be named person controller, and its scope is going to be session. So this is the skeleton of a managed bean that NetBeans created for us, named person controller. So we're going to have the person controller maintain a local copy of our persons. And so we want it to have an attribute that's going to be a list of all the persons that it retrieves from the service. So when we instantiate this managed bean, we want it to populate our list of persons. So we're going to have a map. So we'll create an empty one. So we need to import our person from our data package. We need to import from the utility package our hash map, and we need to import our map. We also want our controller to have an instance of our person client so it can talk to the person client. The person client will talk to our web service. And we need to import our person client from our data package. And the third attribute we want our controller to have is a current person. Because we want at any given time to have our user interface represent a specific person. When we instantiate this, we want it to go out to our web service, and we want it to bring back a list of persons, and we're going to populate this. So as soon as the our user interface comes up, we can populate a data table with a list of persons. So we're going to create a private method called construct. And what we're going to send it is a string in JSON format representing a list of all the persons. So this, in our example, is what this method will return. This is a string representing a list of persons. So this is what I'm getting back from that call, and that is what's getting passed to this construct person list method that we have to write. We want to catch a JSON exception. And we want to make sure that this error message is made available to the user interface. So we want to create a Java server faces message, and we want to put it in our faces context so that message can be displayed in the browser. So I'm going to create a faces message. And it's going to be a severe message. So severe error. And I'll just send the message I get an exception back. And we want to put this message in that we need to import our JSON exception from our JSON. And it's saying this isn't thrown because we don't have this method written yet. So let's go back to here. And this is going to be a private method because the only user that we expect to call this method will be from this constructor. And it'll just be called one time when this controller or this managed bean is instantiated. So what we need to do in this code is take this JSON string and for each person in the list, create a new person object, set its values using the values in this string, and then add it to our map. And this is a method that you'll need to write. And the first thing you'd want to check is if your JSON list of persons is equal to null, or if it's empty, you want to make sure you throw an exception. And once you're convinced that it's not empty, then you can write the code that creates the person objects from the string and places them in this person's map. So that method, writing that method, will be part of the assignment for assignment 6. So we know that one of the user stories, or one of the functionality that's going to be required by our users, is they want to be able to get a list of all the persons, and they're going to create, in the user interface, we're going to have a data table, and we're going to display all those persons in the data table. So we know that the data table is going to require a public method that's going to return a list of person going to import our list. So what we want to do is take, this is a hash map. What we want to return to be able to use in our data table is a list. So we're going to take the values out of this person and return them as an array list. And we can do that by saying that so for a hash map, I can call a method on a hash map called values, and it'll take all the person objects out of that hash map and return them as an array list. And now I have an array list that I can use in my data table in my user interface. Let's do a build to make sure everything's good. So now we're going to go to our, we're going to delete this welcome prime faces. And I'm going to delete this index. So we have our index.xhtml. So we know that we need to include our JSF and our prime faces namespaces. So I've added the prime faces, and I've added the JSF core and the JSF HTML. So we want to make sure that we have those namespaces in our XML and XHTML file. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we have is the ability to display the message that are generated in the controller to the user in the browser. To do that, we're going to add Prime Faces growl. And this is the number of milliseconds that it's going to display on the screen. So this just provides a place for error messages to be displayed. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to create a form to house our data table. And now we're going to create our data table. Its value is going to be the persons. So its value is going to call get persons, and it's going to be this list. So it's going to be a list of all the persons. So as soon as I put persons, it's calling this method. And the name of our bean is person controller. So that's the value. Persons control persons. And remember, this is calling our get persons method. We're only going to allow one person to be selected at a time. And the little keys are going to be ID. So now we have our table defined. We're going to define each of the columns in our table. And we'll create a heading. So this is the header for our ID column. And the actual value we want stored in that column. And we call that column the persons, because for each item in the list, an item is one person. And this is going to call the person. So this item is a person. And it's going to return the get ID for that person. So now I've gone ahead and I've created the first name, last name, and birth date for the columns in our table. And then I'm going to run it. And we see we've got our headers, and it says no records found. And that is because in our controller, we haven't yet populated our persons list. So there's nothing in here because we haven't completed the code to take the data out of this JSON string and put them into our map. So as of right now, we don't have any data in our persons list. But once you've completed that code, then the persons will show up in the data table. So now we want to add the functionality to create a new person. So we want to allow the users from the browser to be able to add a new person to our list and send it to our RESTful service. So what we want to do in our user interface is we want to have a create button. So we're going to add a button to our table, to our form, that the user can click on create, and it will bring up new functionality to create a user. So that's going to involve adding a button that says create on it. When that create button is clicked, we need to go to our manage bean, our controller, and prepare a person to be created. And then we need a dialog box to appear so that the user can enter the person information. So that's the next functionality that we need to add. So we'll add a command button. We'll call it create. Create will be the text that will appear on the button. When it's clicked, we're going to call a method in our controller called prepare create. Get a person ready for creation. Then we're going to update our list form. And then we're going to display a dialog box called person create dialog. So we have to create a prime faces dialog. And when this button is clicked, we want that dialog box to show up. So let's start by seeing what this person controller prepare create needs to do. Public void prepare create. All it's going to do is say current is equal to a new person. So the object that we're going to use for creating this new person, the person we're calling current. So what we're going to do is start it out as a new person, and then through the dialog box, we'll set all its values and then send it over to our service for creation. The next thing we need to do is create a dialog box for a person create dialog box that will allow the user to enter the value. So I've gone ahead and I've created that person dialog, and I've called it person create dialog. And that's what gets displayed here, person create dialog. And it's a prime faces dialog, and it has input text for first name, last name, birthday. And notice that we're using person, controller, current. So when I click a save button on this dialog box, it's going to call the current set first name, current set last name, current set birthday, current. And the IDs we call in our service, they will automatically assign, so we're not having the user enter the services. So we have the input text for all of the attributes for current. Now we have a save button. And when that save button is clicked, it's going to call a method in our controller called create. And then it's going to hide this dialog box, and it's going to update our form. So our next step will be to go to the controller and create this create method. So we want to create a new user. So let's think about what this create method needs to do. First of all, it needs to use our person client object to send a post request to our service. And this post request returns a response to us. And we can look at the response to see whether or not our create is successful. And we're going to send it the string in JSON format. So we're going to call our persons to JSON, and we're going to say, okay, take what's in current. And remember, when we click save in the user interface, it called all the sets to current. So current has all the values that the user entered. Now we're creating it, we're creating a JSON string representing that object, and we're sending it to our web service. And we need to import our response. Now we have to look at whether or not the response was successful. And we need to find out if the response was a bad request, that we need to give the user interface that message. So basically we're going to say, we're going to get the status out of the response. And if the status is bad request, then we're going to use our faces message to put that message, to give that user that message to the user interface. And then we're done with returning birth. So that's if we had a bad request. Now, once I've put a new person in the list, I want to update our local copy. So I'm going to call construct person list, and I'm going to get the list from the service again, just as I did in the constructor. And again, if I have an error message, then I want to make sure that that message gets sent up to the user interface. So that's how I'm going to create a new person. I'm going to create a new person by sending the request to our servers. If the response back is not good, I'm going to generate a user error message. If everything went fine, I'm going to go and get the list from the service again and create a new local copy so that our list in our user interface gets updated. So I think this gives you a pretty good idea of how to go ahead and complete our person client for our person RESTful service. In the assignment handout, it walks you through how to add the functionality for deleting and for editing person. And again, don't ever hesitate to contact me if you have questions.